Left alone at the altar in front of 300 whispering witnesses, Elara Whitcombe thought the worst moment of her life had already arrived, until the groom's cold, powerful brother stepped through the cathedral doors and offered to marry her instead, not out of love, but with a gaze that suggested something far more dangerous had been unfolding long before this day. The lilies in her bouquet were beginning to droop, their once perfect white petals curling at the edges, as if they too could feel the weight of humiliation pressing down upon her chest, tightening with every passing second that Lord Adrian Blackmore failed to appear. The orchestra had faltered into uneasy silence. The priest's voice had long since died in his throat, and the congregation, an ocean of silk, jewels, and judgment, leaned forward in their seats, hungry for scandal, for confirmation that the ambitious but modest-born Elara had overreached in accepting the proposal of a nobleman far above her station. There must be some delay, her mother had whispered earlier, clutching her gloved hands so tightly it hurt. But now even that fragile hope had withered, leaving only the unbearable truth stretching between each tick of the clock. She had been abandoned. Elara kept her chin lifted, her spine rigid beneath the weight of her ivory gown, refusing to grant the audience the satisfaction of seeing her break, though inside her thoughts were splintering. Images of her father's strained smile when he secured the dowry, of her younger sister's shining eyes as they dreamed of better futures, of Adrian's charming promises that now felt like echoes of a lie she had been foolish enough to believe. The heavy doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open at last, and her heart surged violently with desperate hope, her fingers tightening around the bouquet as she turned, certain that Adrian would rush in breathless and apologetic, ready to explain everything, to restore her dignity before it shattered completely. But the figure who entered was not the man she had been waiting for. It was his brother. Duke Lucian Blackmore stood framed in the doorway like a shadow carved into human form, dressed entirely in black, his presence silencing the room more effectively than any command. His reputation preceded him. Cold, calculating, a man who ruled his vast estates with unyielding precision and kept the world at arm's length. And as he walked down the aisle, the sound of his measured footsteps echoed like a verdict being delivered. Elara's breath caught as he approached, every instinct warning her that whatever he brought would not be mercy. And when he stopped before her, his gray eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that stripped away every layer of composure she had left, she knew her life was about to change irrevocably. "Lady Whitcombe," he said, his voice low and controlled, carrying easily through the suffocating silence. "I bear a message from my brother." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd, and Elara felt the fragile threads holding her together begin to snap. "He will not be coming," Lucian continued, each word precise, merciless in its clarity, and though she had suspected it, hearing it spoken aloud struck her like a physical blow. A gasp rose somewhere behind her, whispers igniting instantly, but she heard none of it, her world narrowing to the space between herself and the man delivering her ruin. "Where is he?" she forced out, her voice trembling despite her efforts, her fingers loosening as a few pale petals drifted to the floor. Lucian's expression did not soften. "Gone," he said simply, "and unlikely to return." The finality in his tone crushed whatever hope remained, and for a moment she swayed, the edges of her vision darkening, until his hand closed around her arm, firm, steady, unyielding, keeping her upright before she could collapse. "Stand," he murmured, not unkindly, but with an authority that demanded obedience, and she found herself drawing breath, forcing her body to comply even as her heart splintered. "You have been placed in an impossible position," he went on, his gaze flicking briefly to the audience before returning to her, sharper now, more intent. "In a matter of minutes, this will become the most discussed scandal in the country. Your name will be synonymous with humiliation. Your family's standing will not survive it." Each statement struck with brutal accuracy, and Elara felt the truth settle cold and heavy in her chest. She imagined the letters that would arrive, the invitations that would vanish, the doors that would close forever, not only for her, but for those she loved, and for the first time, fear eclipsed even her heartbreak. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Lucian's eyes, not warmth, not quite, but something deeper, more complex than mere detachment. Because there is another option, he said. The words hung between them, impossible and yet undeniable. Elara stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. What do you mean? His grip on her arm loosened, but he did not step back. Marry me, he said, as calmly as if discussing the weather. The world seemed to tilt, the murmurs swelling into shocked exclamations as his meaning sank in. But Elara could only stare, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what he was proposing. You cannot be serious, she breathed. I am always serious, Lucien replied, his tone unwavering. This ceremony can proceed. The witnesses remain. The scandal becomes something else, something advantageous. You will leave here not as a discarded bride, but as the Duchess of Blackmore. The title felt foreign, overwhelming, yet it carried a weight of protection she could not ignore. Still, suspicion stirred beneath her shock. Why would you do this? She demanded, her voice gaining strength despite her confusion. You barely know me. Lucien's gaze held hers, unflinching. I know enough, he said. Enough to understand what you stand to lose today. Enough to recognize that my brother has wronged you beyond repair. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped slightly, meant only for her. And enough to know that you deserve better than the fate awaiting you if you walk out of this church alone. The sincerity in his words unsettled her more than anything else, because it suggested a depth of awareness she had not expected, and as she searched his face, she found no mockery, no hesitation, only a resolve as immovable as stone. Behind him, the crowd watched with bated breath, her family frozen in stunned disbelief, and Elara realized that this moment, this impossible, surreal moment, was the turning point upon which her entire future balanced. Pride urged her to refuse, to walk away with what dignity she could salvage, but practicality, sharper and more relentless, whispered of consequences she could not escape. Lucien was offering not romance, not even kindness, but survival. If I agree, she said slowly, her heart pounding, what happens then? His answer came without hesitation. Then you become my wife, he said, and no one will ever dare pity you again. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken implications, and Elara felt the last fragments of her former life slipping away, replaced by something unknown, formidable, and irrevocably tied to the man standing before her. She thought of Adrien, of the promises he had broken without a second thought, and then of Lucien, who stood here now offering her a future built not on affection, but on certainty. It was not the love she had dreamed of, but it was power, protection, choice. And so, with the weight of 300 watching eyes upon her, Elara Whitcombe made the decision that would change everything. Yes, she said, her voice steady despite the storm within her. I will marry you. Marriage to the Duke of Blackmore should have felt like salvation, but from the moment Elara stepped into his vast, shadowed estate, she understood she had entered a different kind of uncertainty, one built not on chaos, but control. Blackmore Hall was grand to the point of intimidation, its marble floors and towering ceilings swallowing sound, its servants perfectly trained, yet quietly curious about the bride who had become a duchess in a single, shocking hour. Lucien barely remained at her side, offering only brief instructions before disappearing, leaving her to rooms that were not just luxurious, but eerily prepared. His Grace arranged everything earlier this week, her maid revealed, and the words echoed in Elara's mind, before the wedding, before Adrien fled. That night, she barely slept, the question lingering. Had Lucien known? The following days only deepened the mystery. He remained distant, cold, speaking little, yet somehow aware of everything. Her preferences, her habits, even her unspoken discomforts. Meals changed without her asking. Books appeared that suited her perfectly. Gowns arrived tailored as if he had studied her for years. It was not kindness. It was precision, and it unsettled her more than neglect ever could. Unable to ignore it any longer, she confronted him in the library, where he sat alone by the fire. You've been watching me, she said quietly. Lucien looked up, calm as ever. My brother spoke of you, he replied. Not enough to explain this, she pressed. A pause followed before he admitted, simply, I paid attention. The answer sent a strange, fragile tension through her chest. Why? She asked. His gaze held hers for a moment, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface before it vanished. Because he didn't, Lucian said. It was not the full truth, but it was enough. Because as Elara stood there, she realized this marriage was no accident, and the man she had married had known far more about her than he ever should have, long before she became his wife. Adrian returned with urgency and regret, his voice filled with desperation as he declared he had made a mistake. That fear, not lack of love, had driven him away, insisting he had never stopped loving Elara. But this time, she did not waver. Standing in Blackmore Hall as its Duchess, she saw him clearly, not as the man she once loved, but as someone who had chosen himself when it mattered most. "You left me," she said quietly, her calm cutting deeper than anger. Adrian turned on Lucian, accusing him of taking what was his, but Lucian's response was cold and certain. "She was never yours to claim." And in that moment, Elara understood everything. The difference between a man who wanted her and a man who protected her without ever asking for anything in return. When Adrian pleaded with her to leave with him, to choose their past, Elara felt no pull, only clarity. "You loved me when it was easy," she said. "That isn't enough." Silence followed, heavy and final, before she turned away from him completely. Then she faced Lucian, her voice softer now. "You never asked me to choose you, why?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression. "Because it had to be your choice," he said. And that was when she knew. Stepping toward him, not out of desperation, but certainty, Elara made her decision. "Goodbye, Adrian." This time, she did not look back. Because she was no longer the woman left at the altar, she was the one who chose, and she chose the man who had loved her quietly all along.